the food we take has carbohydrates, fats, proteins, but it cannot be absorbed in the same way. So carbohydrates, if the carbohydrates has to be absorbed, it has to be converted to glucose, and the fats has to be converted to fatty acids and glycerol. Proteins has to be converted to amino acids. These are all the absorbable form of carbohydrates, fats and proteins. So after digestion means the carbohydrate has to undergo several steps, enzymatic processes, and they get converted into glucose. Same way, fats, after the process of metabolism, it undergoes fatty acids and glycerol and gets converted to fatty acids and glycerol. Proteins are converted to amino acids. Now the glucose is the absorbable form, but it cannot be stored in this form in the body. So glucose has to be converted to glycogen to get stored in the body. So glucose enters the metabolic pathway called glycolysis. After this pathway of glycolysis, it gets converted to glycogen. From this glycogen, see, glucose has three pathways. We all know glucose is the energy of the body. So glucose is converted to glycogen. They are oxidized for energy and they get converted to acetyl-CoA. This acetyl-CoA enters the mitochondria inside the cell. It enters the Krebs cycle and generates ATP, which is the fuel of the body. The byproducts carbon dioxide and water are exhaled out. This is the most common pathway, that is the carbohydrates which we take get converted into glucose. After the process of digestion, it is absorbed as glucose, and the glucose enters the glycolytic pathway and they get oxidized for energy production, that is it gets converted to acetyl-CoA, that is this glycogen is get converted into acetyl-CoA. This acetyl-CoA enters the mitochondria of the cell, enters the Krebs cycle, generates ATP and gives fuel to the body, and the byproducts carbon dioxide and water are exhaled out. Next, it has got two other pathways, that is we need glycogen for synthesis of other components also. So part of the glycogen is used for that, and the rest of the excess glycogen is stored as glycogen or fat. So the glucose has three fate, that is one, it gets oxidized for energy, which is the most common, and the excess is stored as glycogen or fat in the body, and few of them are used for synthesis of other components. Next comes the fat. The fat, after process of digestion, it gets absorbed as fatty acids and glycerol. These fatty acids and glycerol has to enter the metabolic pathway called beta oxidation. For glucose, the pathway is glycolysis, and for fat, it is beta oxidation. And through this pathway of beta oxidation, the fatty acids and glycerol are converted. A part of them are stored as triglycerides. This is the storage form of fat. Part of them are converted for triglycerides, and part of them is required for cellular membrane synthesis. We all know cellular membrane is made of lipids. So wherever our body needs lipids, this part of the fatty acids are used for synthesis. And when there is a need for energy, that is when there is not enough glucose, this fat get converted into they are oxidized for energy and gets converted to acetyl-CoA. So fats can also enter this pathway of acetyl-CoA, which enters the mitochondria. Same way it enters the Krebs cycle and generates ATP. That is when there is not available glucose, the fats can be, this is the energy store. This can be converted to acetyl-CoA, and you can get ATP from fats also. So the last one is the proteins. These proteins get converted into absorbable form, that is the amino acids. These amino acids enter the metabolic pathway of transamination. So what happens is, we all know hormones are all made up of proteins. So these are all sent to the places where a new protein compound is required. So these amino acids are used for, after entering the pathway of transamination, they enter the pathway of new protein compound synthesis, and part of them can be stored as glycogen or fat. Same way, when there is no glucose, when there is not enough fat, these proteins can also oxidize for energy and gets converted to acetyl-CoA. So the final thing, if you need ATP, either it is glucose or fat or protein, it has to be converted to acetyl-CoA. This acetyl-CoA enters the Krebs cycle and generates ATP, the energy currency of the body, and the byproducts are same, the carbon dioxide and water. So this is the fate of carbohydrates, fats and proteins which we take in our food.